have another wonderful speaker with us, and that is our good friend, Mr. David Haviland. So for those of you who have been in the astronomy community here in Houston for some time, you've run across David several times. David is very active in several of the clubs here in the Houston area, and is a, I hate to say it, David, but you're an accomplished lunar imager. I know you're very modest about these things, but David has taken some wonderful lunar images. If you've ever seen his work, you can't help but just to say wow when you see it. And so, David, without further ado, I'd like to pass the baton over to you and let you share some of your knowledge with the rest of us.
Okay, let's flip screens.
I'll go ahead and stop my share here. And for those of you who have questions for David during the course of tonight's meeting, please feel free to use the chat function that we have here in Zoom and ask away. If you're following along on Facebook, you can ask in there. I'll be monitoring the Facebook chats as well, and we'll get to those at the end of the program.
Okay, I'm assuming you can see everything.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of modify that title just a little bit. It's my travels so far, because I always consider it a work in progress. As Joe and Don have said, I'm actually have my fingers in all three clubs. I am actually a member of HAS. I'm a kind of a distant background player. Aaron keeps poking, why don't you just make it a foursome and join NHAC? I said, well, maybe. Let's see if I can get this to go. Here we go. I need to get something off my screen. Here we go. This is me. I've been past president of the couple clubs. I do some a little bit of work at the George Observatory. My day job is actually biology, so my motto tends to be cells by day, stars by night. Feel free to grab any pictures during this talk. My email is here if you've got any questions, and I also have an Astro bin that I have started dumping a number of my images to. So if you want better pictures than what I'm going to show tonight, feel free. Now I'm going to start right off and tell you that, as I said, this is a work in progress. I do not consider myself an expert. I still think I have a little ways to go before I can go shoulder to shoulder with somebody like Robert Reeves. I've noticed Dick Locke does some excellent work. Lloyd Overcash has done some work, and I could be mistaken, but I swear I've seen a couple from Chris Morissette. And if there's somebody in HAS that is currently on the call right now that I'm missing, then I humbly apologize. So what got me started in this? What got me started in my part of astrophotography is the moon. I've always loved it. You can observe it in urban skies as a major outreach target. But like many in the club, I was one of those kids that was glued to the TV in 1969. And in my case, it was a 15 inches black and white Zenith TV with my mom. My dad was in Saigon watching it on a smaller TV. It had rabbit ears and I was the remote. Fast forward to about 1998, we got a Celestron Starhopper as a gift, and I pointed at the moon before I ever looked at a deep sky object, which, by the way, ended up being M42. I do want to talk about some tools that will help that I found useful in my travels. Moon Connection, Lunafac, I'm going to talk about those two. Visit themoon.com. Google.com moon actually blends LRO when you dial in really, really super tight. The LROC SESC EDU site is fun, and on my phone I also have the Moon Atlas because I don't always carry my map. I bring this up. This is from Moon Connection because this is through the month. This is actually this month. You can actually see how the moon progresses on a day-by-day basis. And we come out here to probably what's full moon here. And then we get into the waning moon over here. What we have up here is the waxing moon. Waxing is pretty much going to come in the early evening up to about midnight. After that, once you're past a full moon, you'd better start getting up down here. You better start getting up at about 2, 3, 4 in the morning to catch these. Why do I mean we want to catch them? Well, we're always hunting for the terminator. We need to chase the terminator. Here's a basic, here's a basic description of my favorite little phone app, Lunafac. Thing I really like about it, I'm not going to belabor this list, is it gives me its rise time, it gives me the transit time when it's highest in the sky, it gives me the setting time, and it gives me sunset and twilight. and I found it to be a fairly a fairly good app to have. I use it for a lot of planning for outreach events with JSCAS. If I compare 3 consecutive days, in fact, I think one of these is today, for Saturday and Sunday, you'll see the moon is actually growing as it comes, and you'll see the percent lit comes up 15, 23, 32. But I also want to draw your attention to the rise times. 0940, 1010, 1040, the transit time 1542, 1626. It's coming up about 35 to 40 minute offset each day. So you have to plan around that. And then as a quick sidebar, one of my other favorite apps that I like to use when planning observing is Astrospheric. And I got that from, that recommendation came many years ago from Brown. It's pretty handy, and I think many people here are familiar with it. Comedically, I have had it lie to me and tell me it's going to be crystal clear, and I look out on my back porch and I'm seeing a thick cloud layer, but it doesn't lie very often. We chase the terminator in our quest for lunar shots, not this terminator, but this one. And the reason is it's how it's oriented with the light. If the light's coming in strong off the right side, you're going to see the moon here is you can make out detail. Yeah, you can make out Chrysium, Tranquility, Serenitatis, Nectaris down here, but it's really, you don't have a lot of detail. But when you get to the terminator, this is where you're going to get a lot of your nifty detail and a lot of your good high resolution shots. So yeah, we're either up at night or up in the early part of the morning chasing the terminator. Now, what we would really, really like is a nice dry, cool month. I would say 60 degrees, 20% humidity, and absolutely no clouds with pristine seeing for 30 straight days so we can chase the terminator through a month. And some of you are probably chuckling, know that that's not going to happen. So we have to get what we get as far as clear skies, even as far as deep sky and the moon itself. So I also want to refresh your memory on something that many of you have, or at least all the clubs have, is the Night Sky Network Lunar Kit. So this is a minor digression, and I am unfortunately prone to digressions. Those of you familiar with the kit know that you get a 2-scale Earth and a 2-scale moon. And the public often thinks the moon is just right out there in the sky and so close. But when you actually do the exercise in the kit, you put the Earth on inch 1, and the moon calculates out to inch 31. This is 240,000 miles away. That's how far the moon is. And the real fun exercise with this kit, if you haven't, is doing a lunar or total, trying to do a lunar or total eclipse with it, with the sun. It's not easy. Trying to get this guy to cast a shadow on the Earth over here. It takes a little bit of doing, but I encourage you to do that when you pull the kit out. If you ever pull that kit out at the dark side and have some fun with it. But I do bring that up because the moon is quite a ways away. All right. I don't want to go into much of the math, but what is the smallest angle your telescope can resolve? This equation is actually comes from the Dawes limit, and it's a theoretical limit derived back in the 1800s. Get rid of that. S is the diameter of what can be resolved. D is the distance. R is the telescope resolution in arc seconds. And S will be whatever the dimensions of D is. So if I take a 6-inch scope, for example, and go 247,000 miles, S comes to about 0.9 miles. That's a little dubious, and I'll tell you why shortly. If you really go crazy and go for the 36 at the George, it tells you should be able to resolve 0.15 miles. Not possible. This is clearly a theoretical limit, and it is constrained by optics, and it's constrained by atmosphere, and among other things. So all the crazy math aside, on average, you will be able to see 2 to 3 miles without too much of a problem. 3 to 4 miles easy in most scopes, up to about 6 to 8 inches. To see objects 1 to 1.5 miles or even less, you're going to need a scope that is at least 8 inches, 10 or more preferably, but both seeing and clarity have to be exceptional. Some of the better shots will be down to just under a mile resolution. Robert Reeve claims 0.7 of a mile. I'm not going to boast that. I might claim just under a mile. And I think with some of the pictures you'll see tonight, hopefully you'll agree. You can also set up, if you will, your own litmus test as you learn more about the moon's geography and topology. Observation, let's say, for example, the St. George crater. I will remind you of that, and I will bring that up later. It's 7,900 feet across. So if you can resolve that, or splitting the center spur peaks of some of the other craterlets, Enclavius, Theophilus, as well as some of the other craters, as well as the volcanic rills, you're doing pretty well. Craters such as Collin and Armstrong, which are Collins and Aldrin, and I'll show you those, are just around 2 miles. So if you can resolve those craters, you're doing really well. And this, of course, clearly depends on seeing conditions. Bad seeing can be mistaken as bad focus, and that was a little lesson to learn. As we know, the moon, we went to the moon 6 times. 12 men walked on the moon, and sadly, only 4 of them are still with us today. But how many times at outreach have we been asked, can I see the flag on the moon? And I can just imagine some of you chuckling because I've lost count how many times I've been asked that. There's a very basic lack of understanding that we've been more than once. Always remember that most have never seen the moon through a telescope. And then you have to have the discussion about camera resolution. So if the best Earth scope can get to about 7/10 of a mile, there's no way you're going to see a 30-foot limb or a 3-foot flag. Leave that to the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter photos. For the record, I'm going to show you the Apollo landing sites as I have currently photographed them. Some of them are okay, some of them need improvement. 11, 15, and 17 are pretty easy to find. 16 is easy to find once you see it. However, 12 and 14 take some work because, spoiler, they're out in the middle of nowhere and you kind of really have to dig for them. So lunar photography versus astrophotography versus a new thing, EAA. And I know you guys have a SIG group on it. Excuse me. It's not the same thing. It's different. It's all kind of apples and oranges. Lunar photography can be done in light polluted skies. It often requires much shorter exposures in the range of milliseconds, not minutes. And as I said, I have limited experience, but I don't call myself an expert. So what I'm doing is telling you what it took to get going in hopes of discussions that in passing that I've had with Joe, and then a little bit more open with Don on getting new people interested in, beginners interested in doing astrophotography. So that's really my kind of goal with this. Astrophotography, long duration with multiple short subs or longer will take hours of acquisition and will take hours of processing. EAA involves multiple 10 to 100 short exposures with or without guiding, and they're often processed exclusively in SharpCap. This is M57 that I nabbed one night in the West Dome, and I was actually tickled to get that center star, but it's a little different than lunar imaging. Lunar imaging is different because although the exposures are short, the subject is also extremely bright, and to craft a decent image, you've got to have some care in the photography and in the processing, and that's what we're going to go through. However, there are many commonalities between these approaches, and yes, some are obvious even to visual observing. You need a clean collimated scope. You've got to figure out the focus. I'll say it more than once. Focusing on the computer screen is nothing like focusing in the eyepiece. Alignment, you need to be reasonably aligned to a degree. You can accept some drift in lunar photography, and we'll talk about that. You should plan on what you tend to observe and what you intend to shoot. So you don't have to have a camera. You can start with a cell phone, as many have with these particular kind of funky little mounts. I've seen that. And I've also had a numerous star party events where somebody will, oh, can I get a picture of the moon? And they'll put their iPhone or Android up and nab a quick picture. And this is a picture that I nabbed for this purpose with my Android phone. It needs some work, but hey, it's a picture, and people are really tickled when they walk away with their camera and they've got a picture that they took of the moon, and they're really happy campers. My very first image was using an Orion planetary auto guiding camera with a very dated Win 7 32-bit laptop. The scope is my 6-inch Dob, untracked and unguided. I had the laptop on the bed of my truck. The Dob was out in the garage, and I just lined it up and wait for the moon to come across the view, and it was done. 150 frames. It had Registacks only, take the top 60% and tweaked it up. And I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. This is great. Well, I've had a bad assumption. So this is why I'm also telling you all my mistakes. I assumed the camera and the software were talking to each other. Not so. Little did I know that picture was 110% prime choice dumb luck. While it took a little bit before I got something decent and worth showing, I had countless failures of that. I was beginning to doubt my efforts, the new camera, the scope, and the entire process. This is what happens when you take on the fully illuminated moon a color camera. This is one where you don't pay attention to what's that thing called, a histogram? Yeah. And this is what you have if you've got focus or hideous seeing conditions. Sometimes the moon is nice, sweet, and steady, and sometimes it is like semi-set jello. If it's semi-set jello, go for observing. Don't even bother trying to take a picture of it. I eventually settled and decided I had enough of this camera. With some research, I settled on the QHY5 178N monochrome. It's got a modest chip, nice small pixels, and it works with Win 10 and a USB 3. So I thought, okay, maybe that will solve my problems. No, actually, I kept getting more crappy data. So you've got to know your scope. You've got to know the camera, how it works. You got to know your acquisition software, whether that's FireCapture or SharpCap. Again, focusing is nothing like in the eyepiece compared to the screen. You've got to know your tracking software, the stacking software, I'm sorry, and you got to know your final processing software. In this case, for me, Photoshop, Creative Cloud. As I sat back and looked at all of these, I realized I had deficits on all of them. I was trying to wage a war on 5 fronts at the same time. So I said, someone might have been Sonny or Jeff Lepp and FBAC said, what do your histograms look like when I showed him this picture? And my first response was, what histogram? It wasn't the camera's fault. So the first thing I found when I latched on to Robert Reeves, what he was using FireCapture, I said, well, okay, I'm going to change. What I had been using was PhD planetary. And some of you might go, what? Yeah, PhD planetary is made by the same people that make PhD guiding or PhD2 guiding. The planetary program is often issued with cameras, and it turns out the histogram feature isn't hidden, but it's not obvious to find either. You've got to look for it, and it totally slipped under my radar. I settled onto FireCapture, found the histogram. I found I had very fine control over the exposure with the clicks. I could get very fine control over the gain. I could set my region of interest just by left clicking and then down to right clicking. It actually felt like it was going to solve some problems. However, let's keep going. Connie noted that, God, you sure seem to be struggling with these Schmidt-Cassegrains. Why don't you try something simpler? And I go, why didn't I think of that? So what I have here is a contrived picture for the purpose of this slide. What I had was said, why don't you try the Orion Wide Tube 80 without the solar screen? I had it with a Barlow attachment without the lens because I needed the extra tube length because of the back focus of the camera. And I had this on her Orion Atlas mount. And I chuckle a little bit about this because correct me if I'm wrong, Don, but I think it was December 2020, you had a number of us talking about what it took to get us started and our travels through various forms of astrophotography. And during the prep meeting, we all started kind of chortling a little bit because you asked the question, what's the one piece of advice we wish everybody gave? And it was start simple. And we all just laughed and said, yeah, that's exactly it. So that's exactly what I was doing here is with the Wide Tube 80. And somebody's talking in the background. Okay, so the third thing I needed to solve was processing. And this is not my picture, but this is actually a kind gift. This was a kind gift from Jeff Lepp, who took it through his one of his high-end refractors. So we knew the data was good when I looked at the AVI. And what I've done is I've practiced my processing with it as I learned more about AutoStakkert, and learn more about Photoshop. And I got to the point where now I can start actually pulling out all kinds of rays, dimensions, all kinds of little detail things here out of Mare Ibrium, Sinus Iridium, Plato, the valley over here, skipping over here into Mare Serenity. And I said, aha, okay, I think I'm kind of getting the picture now, but it took some time. So here's the first image off Connie's mount with a short tube 80, my QHY camera that I'd actually processed and felt like I actually was kind of knowing what I was doing, trying to at least had a concept. And sure enough, I've got I think Clavius here, Magnus here, Tycho's tucked up here. We've got the three Alphonsus, Arzachel, and the other one over here. Chrysium's kind of getting washed out, and Tranquility's over here, and you start getting some decent detail. And I said, aha, okay, I think I'm beginning to get this. How desperate was I? I came very close to taking my camera, asking Bob Reeves for his address, and I was going to drive to San Antonio and ask him to check out the camera. That's the level of frustration I had. So my main methods of operation have been with my Celestron SCT-11 in the background, CGEM mount. I have played with the Orion Atlas mount and a 8-inch SCT periodically, but most of the pictures tonight you'll see will be off the 11-inch. Let's start with a clean scope and a fully charged battery. I'm not trying to beat my own drum, but I have a YouTube video on the JSCAS YouTube site on cleaning corrector plates, mirrors, and in that video I take the 6-inch DAV apart and put it all back together and collimate it. So I highly recommend learning how to clean. I will clean sometimes right before an imaging session. If you want other YouTube videos, Newtonian reflectors are nicely done in here, and SCTs are done in this video here, where this guy completely takes this thing down and reaches in and cleans the primary as well. This was the 8-inch SCT, and you can see there's kind of a fuzz on here. It was actually on both sides of the corrector plate, so I had to pull the corrector plate completely and check out the primary, and found the primary was fine. It was just some kind of haze. You could actually take your finger in and write your initials on either side of the corrector plate. While I was there, I also swapped out these for Bob's knobs, and here at least the corrector plate's clean, but I hadn't quite swapped out the knobs yet. So again, don't hesitate to clean. Also had to get my head wrapped around collimation. That was obviously an important thing in figuring out the star testing. Focusing. Some people have tried to use cut bicycle knobs or this feather touch back here. I'm not a fan of either one of these, because at least when you're dialed into the moon or really deep sky objects, the minute you touch the telescope, the central column of the telescope, it starts wobbling. So what I've opted to do is I've got a 10-to-1 Crayford on the back of both scopes. That solves the problem of mirror flop, if that's a problem, because I just put the mirror in the middle position and I do all the focusing here. And then over here on the 10-to-1 knob, I'll have an overstretched clothespin. And I'll have that set up here as well if I were to ever use a Barlow. Now, the only rub to that overstretched clothespin is in the dark. And if you touch it wrong, part of it goes into the pool and the other part goes over your left shoulder. So with the aid of a 3D printer, I came up with these nifty guys for the 8-inch and the 11-inch, and I just had to cut the handle down so that I could make a 360-degree revolution. Touching these in fine focus does not disturb the optical column very much, and does give you the opportunity to try to get some focus and solve that issue. Another important one is alignment, but again, you can take some liberties. In preparation of the 2017 eclipse, there were phone apps that I used to align the telescope in the daytime. It's iOS only, but I also employ the iOptron polar alignment app on the iPad that I have, and I will use that to check my axis direction and direction to the North Celestial Pole, as well as the angle of the scope. Reason being, that's my north view. Polaris is right about there. He's a nice neighbor, so I'm not going to jump the fence with a chainsaw. I know this discussion cropped up on the HAS Facebook page. I am a big advocate of the star sense in my backyard. If I'm setting up for 2 or 3 days, I let star sense do its thing, and I almost have very, very little drift to worry about. You want it as close as you possibly can without any drift, but if you have some drift, it's not the end of the world. What you do in that case is, I'll show you on the next slide as well, is you can keep the cursor on a rim of a crater and then have the hand controller set at its lowest possible slew rate. And it's okay to give the scope a nudge. To some degree, when you do it this way, if I put the cursor here, now FireCapture does not let the cursor die off. So once it's on, it's on. So it'll let me keep the figure largely centered in the FireCapture screen here by just a gentle nudge. The stacking software will take care of the errant frames where the scope has actually had to move. So I've actually gotten some decent shots. Note that I know that I've had to nudge in order to get them. So you want that alignment as good as you possibly can get it. But if you got a slight drift, it's, as I said, it's not the end of the world. So what I do is I visually start off with the moon. Everything's set. I've got the alignment. Visually I set here. Then I connect the scope to the computer, and then hopefully away we go. Now, best time again to shoot. I bring this up for this month. You want to try to hunt for the terminator, and you want to hunt for that terminator when it's at the highest part of the sky, or what we call a transit. Well, you might have to wait. And that's what happened to me one night. I was really wanting to get this particular part of the moon. Oh, I had to kill 45 minutes. So I went after Jupiter and Saturn. Little digression there. I will not claim credit for these pictures, even though I took them. Chris Wells was a godsend in showing me things that I did not know about Registacks. He really helped pull the pictures out of these. Little drink break. Let's talk about the workflow. Here's how it started. FireCapture is what captures the AVI file. I take it to AutoStakkert. I was using Registacks and using Registacks for wavelets. I get frustrated with how they describe to use the wavelets. They just say, tweedle these until they look good. And I'm looking for something a bit more objective than just making it look good. So I wasn't pleased with that part of the step, but nonetheless, from here, I would go into Photoshop Creative Cloud. And I opted for the $9 a month subscription for it. Robert Reeves clued me in that AutoStakkert can actually do a certain level of sharpening. And once I discovered that, I have since basically removed Registacks from my workflow. I go from AutoStakkert, let it sharpen, and then go to Photoshop Creative Cloud. Has that ever bit me? Yes. In more wide field pictures, usually with the 8-inch SCT, AutoStakkert sharpened image. When I bring it into Photoshop, and I'll show you the workflow in Photoshop on the next slide, one of the procedures I do is the shake filter. And sometimes that shake reduction filter will completely gack up the picture. So there I almost have to go back to the unstacked AutoStakkert image and then come back through and then work it through Photoshop. If I'm dialed in tighter with the C11, I usually don't have to worry about it. So in Photoshop, here's what we have here. I pull in the image, even though it's a monochrome image, Photoshop wants to treat it as a color image. So the first thing I do is make it grayscale. Filter noise despeckle, filter shake reduction. That will usually tighten it up and make some major improvements right there. I'll crop it, take it to camera raw, adjust, and this is where it gets a little subjective, but it's what your eye says. I'll adjust the camera, the exposure, contrast, lower the whites, raise the blacks, play with the clarity and dehaze, and just try to sharpen things up and pull out details, usually out of the floor, the ridges and volcanic ridges in the floor of the moon. I'll increase the size, bring up the DPI to about 300, and then I'll burn dodge these areas that become artifact by processing. And I'll talk about those toward the end. I'll mention one right now. In most of the craters, you'll get what are called bathtub rings. you'll get things that just don't make sense, that shouldn't be there. So you need to kind of dodge them out. I'll do a gentle sharpen, save it as a TIFF, and then I'll usually annotate it and move it to a JPEG. And then if it looks good, I'll post it. What do I mean by if it looks good is I'll put it in a folder, walk away for a couple of days. And if I come back and say, okay, that looks good, I'll put that out on Facebook, or I'll put that out on Astrobin, or I'll look at the folder and go, oh, hell no, you're not, you've overprocessed that, scrap it, start over. That happens more times than I care to mention. So again, my main program here that I've now used is FireCapture, because I've got full control over gain, exposure. I can see the histogram. I don't want to get any spikes where I'm going to get noise at the low end or noise at the high end. So I always try to keep the gamma in the center or off, and just mainly use gain and exposure, and just keep the exposure not much more than that. This is at 87%. I usually don't like going much higher than that. You can usually pull information out of slightly darker areas, but if it's completely blown out, you can't pull that information out of the pixels. It's out of the image. It's just not there. Okay, I want to see if I can do that. Hopefully this will stay with me. And okay, go. Hopefully you're going to be able to see this. This is an actual vid of Rima-Huygens. I'm going to show this picture a little bit later on. You can see there's a little bit of wobble. The tracking is relatively decent. Some of the rills that you might be able to see, and shadows and contrast, some of the minor craters that you're seeing are coming in and out, telling me that it's reasonably focused, as is the center spur peak of this crater over here and the peak over there. So this is a actual vid. And if I can get that to over here and come back to, come on, slow computer. Great, spinning wheel of death. Just don't crash Photoshop or PowerPoint.
While we're waiting for that to come up, David, could you take maybe one question?
Sure.
If it comes up. Peggy Mueller had a question. Peggy, do you want to come off of mute and ask?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, so I have an 8-inch Daub. I'm a novice. And I've been trying to take pictures through it with my DSLR at a full frame 35mm. My Daub has a 1200mm focal length. And nothing comes into focus, so I think I need to move the mirror, but I don't know how to calculate exactly where I need to move my mirror to get focus.
I did that with my Daub, and I also used that Barlow without the element to give me a little bit of extra focus. Now with a DSLR, I'm not sure what you're going to be able to do to get an extra back focus unless you can buy a longer T-ring. I don't know if he's on this, but I know Jeff Lepp has done some photography through a Daub, and I think he actually had to physically move the mirror.
Yeah, I think that's what I might need to do, but I don't know how to figure out how.
I'm going to have to punt that question because I've not crossed that bridge and I'm not sure where to look.
Yeah, I'm on. I did that to my Daub. In fact, that picture that you showed earlier that I sent you, David, was actually taken through my Daub, not a refractor.
Oh.
But that's okay. What I did was I actually put in 2-inch, I think they were 2-inch bolts to replace the ones that were there. And it was just a guesstimate on my part. There was actually someone that had done that and posted it on their Flickr site, and I kind of copied what he did. But I did have some problems removing one of the bolts broke, so I had to basically drill it out because it was glued in. So it's not a trivial thing to do. But that will help you get focus with the DSLR. But actually, if you can get a camera like what David has, you may not have to do that.
Okay. So, okay. Wow. Thank you.
I mean, it's kind of limited. Honestly, it's limited what you can do with the DSLR and the Daub because you don't have tracking. But it can be done, and I've done it. But it does take some work to do.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thanks. Great. And thank you, David. This is great talk. Enjoying it.
All right, David.
Good to go. I'm going to keep
You're back
going.
online, right? Okay.
All right. Yeah. A PowerPoint finally woke up. That's part of my bonus I'm going to get from work. It's called a new desktop. Okay, moving on. AutoStakkert pulls in the AVI, grades them, and rates each individual frame in the file, whether you've got 2,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 frames. It aligns them through means how it determines the quality. I don't know anything about how it does that or the algorithm. It is freeware and it outputs to a 16-bit TIFF file. This is the initial setup. I'll do surface, expand, I'll set it up for local, and then I'll have it put it in folders of the top 10% and the top 20%. Some people I know when they're doing planetary will do 80% or so. I have honestly, and I've had this conversation with Robert Reeves, I've never really found a reason to go beyond 20 to 25. I've stacked 80. And when I look at try to compare the final image between the two, I don't see any difference. So I'm kind of along the lines of why make the extra work for the computer? I'm perfectly good with 20 or 25. It sets itself up here and starts to go. So it actually comes in two screens. It'll be this one over here and this one over here. And it's setting up to do a lot of its analysis on this section here. Now, when it's done with the analysis, it gives you this quality graph. And this is actually like one of the best quality graphs I've ever seen out of my own data. Usually this green line is the quality line, and it's usually ducktailing down here by about 20 or 25%, which is also part of the reason I choose 20 to 25% of the images to stack. You do end up with some really crappy ones down here. And so what I do is I tell it to, in this case, give me the 25%, sharpen them, and stick them in a folder for me. And so what I have here is getting a little bit serious. This is a still from that 35-second vid that you just viewed. I adjusted the hue a little bit because some of them are coming up a little dark initially because I'm trying to pull information out of them as I process them. So this is the individual one from the still. Here's the composite stacked. Here's the composite stacked after AutoStakkert sharpens it. And I'm debating doing just what I do in AutoStakkert and putting that up as a YouTube vid, as if that would be of any help or interest to anyone. And you can actually see there are some rills here, small craters coming in. And as a geological of interest, you've got this plate here and this plate here, and these two plates separated. They pulled apart. And the whole floor here just collapsed in. There are a lot of volcanic vents here. A lot of this stuff over here is from volcanic activity. And at one time, Remahagenes was thought to it was on the list to be an Apollo 16 landing site, but they ended up going to the Descartes Highlands instead. Here it is processed through Photoshop. You see a whole lot more detail, a lot more smaller craters, some of the things sitting here. This is the final image. So where does processing get you? Here's all four coming across. Here's the vid frame. Here's the final image. So this underscores the importance of the processing part. I like this image. I can kind of get lost in it. Okay, final steps are conducted in Photoshop Creative Cloud. As I said, if you don't know Photoshop, you got to make that a priority. That was my problem. I had to basically take 2 months off and learn Photoshop because I thought I knew it and found out I didn't. All right, on to images, which is part of the reason we're here to have fun. This is the southern end of Mare Tranquility. I've got Sabine, Ritter, the Hypatia Rills. I've got Mulkey. And I've had some people say, well, that's nice, but could you annotate it? Because it would make a lot more sense if you did. But sure, why not? So everything I'm going to show you is going to be annotated. Mulkey, Aldrin, Collins, Armstrong. Collins is the smallest one of the three, and it's just a bit over 2.1 miles in diameter. So if you can resolve half that crater, then I might be down to a mile. Cat's paw is tucking right here, and if you dial in on it or Google it, you're going to find it actually looks like a cat's paw that is in freshly raked litter. And just off to the east of that is the Apollo 11 landing site. This one was taken in early morning on a waning moon You can tell by the shadows are over here. I mean, over here is my terminator. So I'm really close to the terminator. And then what got me was the long shadows here, telling me, kind of reflecting just how high some of these mountains are. Alpine Valley, Mount Pico. It's interesting to know by the shadows. This shadow, given the curvature of the moon, it may not be true, but you think length of these shadows, these mountains might be higher than these. Here, Poseidonus, Lemonnier, down here to Taurus Littrow. I dial in over here. Here's a mountain range coming in around the corner up. You've got a central mountain range here. Taurus Littrow right here is where the last Apollo 17 landed. And you got to think they were doing pinpoint landings from Apollo 12 on, as it took some gumption to fly this thing backwards on its back and then come over these mountains and just simply drop down right there. Vitreous, Dawes, a lot of the detail also on the surface here is really kind of cool to get into. 15 is the easiest to find. I will show you a number of pictures. This is in Mare Imbrium. This is the, come on mouse, there we go. This is the Apennine mountain range. Apollo 15 landed right about here. If you kind of see Hadley C winking in and out, and then you see the real kind of winking, you've got decent seeing and you probably have decent focus. So that's a hallmark to keep track of. But you see where that, not only where the asterisk is, if I can circle it right here, there's a dimple. In fact, I'll try to put it right there at 12 o'clock to the red dot. That is St. George's crater that I mentioned early on in the past, or early on in the first few slides. No, it's not me. This is L Cross. Here is St. George's crater right here. Here is the Hadley Rill area. This is Mount Hadley, and Apollo 15 landed roughly right about here. I wish this one was mine, but no, it's not. This is St. George's crater, 7,900 feet across. And the thing with the moon is, without additional landmarks, trees, other things, probably without the atmosphere, you lose your perspective on how large things actually are. So I look at this, oh, that can't be, that's got to be like a 5-iron. I can get from here to here without any problem. No, it's well over a mile across. So then you come back and you see this there. And then you're getting fairly decent resolution. You probably got to be getting down to about 4,000 feet, 5,000 feet. Some of the things here. Now, some of this here, it doesn't look like it's really nice and snapped, like a nice hard focus. This still could be seeing at this point. This is straight through the C11, no Barlow. If the seeing's not good, don't even think about a Barlow. Okay. This one I really like because I've got a lot of nice surface detail. Theophilus here, again, a hallmark or in litmus test. That split center spur peak is split into at least 5 pieces. If you can resolve that, resolve the terrace walls, you're doing real well. Over here, Lindsay and Dollins are 2 connected craters. And they're old craters because they're lava filled. There's no center spur peak in them. Now the southern wall in Dollin is kind of missing, but they're almost pristine if you just use your imagination on Dollin. And if you look, there are no other 2 craters conjoined like that in the area. So I'm trying to get you to lock that in your mind. So the next time through the scope, if you look just to the east, you see these 2 white specks. And then between those 2 white specks is where Apollo 16 landed. So right here is the Apollo 16 landing site right here, but here are your 2 landmarks. If you can find Lindsay and Dollin and look just east and see the 2 little white specks, they landed right there. 12 and 14 are out in the southwest section. Yeah, 12 is down here. Landsberg, you can try to leapfrog a few craters and kind of work your way out over there. Yeah, no, I'll tell you why in a little bit. 14 is a little easier because you can come with these 2 ridges here. You got Crater Perry down here. These 2 ridges here with a separation here. You've got two craters tucked away here. There's a crater here. You kind of come over here into this volcanic area. And that's where 14 landed. 14's purpose was exploring volcanic parts out of Mare Imbrium down in the Ocean of Storms. Apollo 12's purpose was a pinpoint landing here. This is an L-CRAW. This is not me. This is the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. This is Snowman. Here's the head. Here's the body. Here's the 2 feet. Intrepid landed here, and they walked over here to Surveyor. They needed to pick a part off of Surveyor. And I don't know if it's still in the Smithsonian, but when I was there in 2017, that part that Pete Conrad and Alan Bean plucked off of Surveyor was in the Smithsonian. This crater is only about 300 feet across. So there's no way. Oops. Where did you go? Come on, mouse. And it's stalling again. Okay. God, it blew up. Let's go back again. Grr, apologies. 14, 14, 14, second one of 14. We go right there. And we'll try this again. There we go. Okay, so there we were. That's why you can't really see 12 very well. All right. This one is not my Sunday's best, but if you come up here to Ritter, Sabine, Aldrin, and Collins, you catch it. Apollo 12. You go 1, 2, 3. You're right here on Lindsay and Dolan, and you're within line of sight of the Apollo 16 landing site. So here I've got one picture with 2 sites in it. You can also work to get 17, but we'll talk about 17 later. I do not know off the top of my head how far away these are across. Let's talk a little bit about the moon's libration. This was an eye-opening experience for me. Most of the time you're going to see the moon like this. You're going to see Mare Frigolis up here, very, very thin area, not an awful lot of stuff north of that. You're going to see Umboltanium tucked over here. And then lo and behold, one day Lady Luna was really like showing me the top of her head because my moon atlas ran out of information right at about this level. I had to look up and find Phoeolus, Anorgas, and Axorgas. I had to find that one. And then there's a whole bunch of other things up here I normally do not see. One time I was also looking and came across, oh, well, good, there's Endymion. And I'm going, what in the Sam is this? Normally, Humboldtianum is just this little grayish dark speck that runs along the horizon. And Belovich K here and the other craters over here. I took this as a screenshot and sent it to, I don't know if he's on or not, Sonny Manley, and he came back and said, congrats, you've actually got this. So this is a libration in action, where this is when the Lady Luna is really showing me her left shoulder. And so for that, I acknowledge him and thank him for giving me the link where this will show you, you put this, load that into Google, it will show you the 360-degree face-on rotation that the moon makes during its cycle. Okay, coming off to the south, I've got my favorite down here, Clavius. I love how these five craters came into play. The structure of the terraced walls, this one here that's right in the wall of the crater here, Magnus, and then everybody's favorite Tycho that really lights up the moon near the full moon. This one, Rimihygenus, we talked about this one when I talked about the whole processing, so I'm not going to dwell too much on that one. Here are 3 of my favorites: Ptolemy, Alphonsus, and Arzakel. These are common outreach targets. And the catch here is these are snapshots of history. Ptolemais is probably the oldest. I do not have information on it, but it's the oldest because you don't have a lot of wall structure. Its depth is fairly shallow, only at 1.5 miles. You don't have a lot in the way of a center spur peak. Alphonsus is a little younger because you've got you can still see the wall somewhat intact. You've got the remnants of a center peak, but Arzachel is clearly the newest one. You've got very much terraced walls and a peak right in there. So this is a favorite topic area. And I also want to bring up these little things, these little stipplings coming up here. They're called catenas. And I will bring that up toward the end of the lunar shots. While we're talking about craters, let's talk about size of craters. Some of these craters on the moon is very easy to take their size for granted. Meteor crater is 3,800 feet across in Arizona, only 3,800 feet across, some 560 feet deep, and the impact energy was approximately 10 megatons. The running joke, of course, is, oh, this meteor impact narrowly missed the visitor center. Well, if you come back and you look at Ptolemais at 135 kilometers across, if you put 135 kilometers on us, you go from Galveston to just short of College Station. So this crater is quite is quite sizable, in fact. We've seen that one, Sorrentiatus Tranquility. This is Taurus Littrow down here. Taurus Littrow up there. I should have taken this one out, to be honest with you. Oh, no. I had that in here because I sometimes have problems shooting this area because of the reflective nature of the stuff that's on the mountains. And it turns out in 2017, H.H. Schmidt, yes, Harrison Schmidt, lunar module pilot for Apollo 17, published this in Icarus, in Elsevier Publishers, revisiting the field geology of Taurus Littrow. And if I understood it correctly, he talks about the unique and prominent highly reflective soil in the area, which probably makes why photographing that is somewhat problematic. If I have to get it when it's just on or just barely off, if I'm more than a couple of days to either side of the terminator, it comes out really blown out. Going off to the west side, I like the way Schroeder's Valley showed up, Aristarchus with his interesting craters, walls of that crater. They're almost at a steep angle of about 45 degrees. And it's really interesting. It's not a typical crater that you'd see in the southern area. So I want to look at craters in just a little bit of detail. So this is just a touch of a small digression. I hope don't think I'm running out of time. We've got various layers in the moon, and then what you get is an impact, joking aside. And you end up with what happens with these layers is they fold back on themselves. And they found that with Meteor Crater. They found the layer up top here, Toroweep, was not supposed to be there. What's supposed to be on top is this Kaibab, but it isn't. And what they realized by drilling down and looking at the layers is that the impact has basically forced the top part of the soil just to flop back. Well, the same thing happens here with a crater like Copernicus. All of this is material that has flopped back secondary to the impact. And all of this stuff out here littering to the outside is ejecta that turn around and hit. If you look at some of them have little arcs away from the impact. That's not a processing artifact. They're actually there. There's a good one here that's kind of scrolling up as well as over here. So you not only do you just see the crater, you can see the secondary impacts of the crater as it formed. You can just kind of get lost in it. The largest impact area is Mare Imbrium. 700 miles across. It was thought to be an impactor anywhere from approximately about 150 miles across. Some almost 4 billion years ago created this. Now the walls are pretty much gone because this was largely lava, but it left the Apennine Mountains intact. Plato came along and that was an impact. secondary impact up here. This was an impact, the sinus iridium. I'm sure at one point the wall came straight across and this other impactor completely mucked that up. But that's known to be the largest impact on the moon. Going to the southwest, Schiller, 43 miles wide, 100 miles long, and about 2.4 miles deep. Daniel Barringer, who did all the work in the early 20s on the Barringer meteor crater, found that even if he went as low as a 30-degree incident angle, he will still get a roughly circular crater. This kind of lends to a glancing blow, if you will. I think it may have come in over here, piled up some of the material here, and this thing probably never made full impact with the moon and skirted off into space. I think this is probably a glancing blow. I could be dead wrong, but it sure looks that way. The straight wall off of our Zachel down the big three. Straight wall is often a hot area of observation. It is thought to be an escarpment roughly about 60 degrees angle, and when the sun catches it, the shadow extends it, which is why we're really seeing the shadow. It's only approximately 200 to 350 meters tall, but it's a cool object. Don't hang up, computer. Okay, quick drink while it decides. Okay, last couple of high resolution images, and then I'm going to start the home stretch. This is Mare Nectaris, Theophilus. We saw this when we were chasing down the Apollo 16. These were caught, I can guarantee you, because the terminator is over here. These were caught in the early morning when the sky and my pool and everything else was very, very still in the sky. You can actually see a lot of fine detail. This one and the next one, the only place I will remotely brag and to say these last two are probably my Sunday's best. This is Rupus altai. I'll show it to you better in the next picture. This is actually the original wall of Mare Nectaris. Mare Nectaris came in when there was largely lots and lots of lava, and then all these other impactors just came in after the fact. But there's just lots and lots of little detail here. If I slide to this next one, Rupus altai, you were seeing it here. Fractiotaurus is over here, again, was in the previous picture. You can actually see how it runs up, but you've got all the detail in the craters coming down here. And then you come across things that look like this. And then I turn around and blow it up over here, even at the risk of kind of pixelating it. You've got almost two parallel chains of craters, all parallel in one way. And then there was some way over there next to Ptolemy. I looked all over the net trying to find where, Sam, could these come from? Because it's pretty clear it wasn't a bump, roll type of situation of a rock. Geological explanations weren't working well. So I just broke down and emailed Walt Kiefer at the Lunar Planetary Institute, say, Walt, where do these come from? And I sent him this picture. I did chuckle and smile when he said, wow, what a cool picture. But he said, you've touched on something that's under current scrutiny right now in lunar geology. We're not 100% sure how these form, but the given hypothesis is that these are little wisps, collections of rocks that are traveling in a linear line off the tails of possibly comets. And then they just go from one ebb and flow of gravitational field to another, and some of them end up impacting the moon. Now, chances are this was one string, this was another string, and they traveled together and impacted here. Others on the moon may have traveled singly. And they said, until we actually chase one, see one, and see it, trace it through the sky and see it impact, we're just going to have to live with that as the going hypothesis. I said, it works for me. Well, you might find that interesting. All right, coming back and wrapping up. To do imaging, you will need space. Best option is a dedicated computer. An average 4,000 frame AVI of the moon will take 40 to 70 seconds and be easily 4 to 10 gigs, depending on the region of interest. You may plan 5 to 7 regions of interest, but you're going to be like a kid in a candy store. You're going to go, ooh, what's this? Shoot it. Ooh, what's that? Shoot it. And you'll shoot and shoot. I have often filled as much as 300 to 350 gigs in one evening with anywhere from 16 to 43 AVI vids. I'm on my 3rd portable drive. Do I keep everything? No, I've gotten to a point now when I realized, no, seeing was not good. Oh no, David, you gacked up the focus. I might keep the AutoStakkert frames, but I bail the AVIs because the AVIs will occupy a ton of space. I only really keep the AVIs of the good ones that I like. You're going to make mistakes, accept it. Improper focus, focus and seeing will be your enemy. I prefer not to look at fail as a depressing thing. I prefer to look at failing as first attempts in learning. You got to spend some time figuring out the focusing. As I said, focusing on the screen is nowhere near what it is focusing in a visual mode. Seeing, histogram, you got to figure out and know your camera, and you got to be familiar with your acquisition software. False ridges in processing. This is a processing artifact. There's also a nice big donut ring in there. There's no two great walls in parallels. One of these is a processing artifact. Here I tried to process it out, but I still just don't like the way the picture was shaping up. So it's better off just to start over and start the processing over. Errors that can be introduced through processing: gray shadows. There are no gray shadows on the moon. Robert Reeves, and I believe, and I'm with him on this one, shadows are all black. Bathtub rings are very common. They're usually cropping up in craters. You'll get baggage tags, patches of false detail, parallelism, false ridges can occur, false central peaks. I can process central peaks into craters smaller than 15 miles, and it's all fake. It's not live, it's not Memorex, it's fake. And you can get dust donuts created by dust spots on the optics, which lends to keeping things clean on the optics. So how do you improve? I tried to reach out of my weight class and look for those who are doing it better. Ask them what they're doing. Learn to thrive on failure. Analyze everything. Hypothesize for the current error or problem. Hope and pray for a clear sky, and then test your working solution. Here are a couple of people, in addition to Robert Reeves, who I think are doing it much better than I am. Uli Melling in Germany. He's using a Zeiss Cassegrain 400 millimeter. He's got some gorgeous detail resolution here of Clavius. And then over here, he's got Theophilus and Chryllis. The detail he's getting, particularly in the fractured walls, is incredible. Remember this guy way down here, Clavius? I just showed him to you previously. Luc Cathala in France using a 625 millimeter Newtonian with a Barlow. He's using the same camera I am. So it's like, that bar's pretty high, but my God, look at the detail on the rim, the detail in this crater, and it's got the 5 beautiful craters coming in here. It's just, it's crazy. All right, rarely is something like this a single effort. I've made a number of links found a number of links that have helped me out. Facebook group, Moon Photography and Communications with Robert Reeves. Again, a lot of help, a lot of good advice, timely advice from Jeb Lepp, Sonny Manley, Al Kelly, Chris Wells, Trevor Quinn, and Bob Reeves. Photos and logs from here. The virtual Moon Atlas is a good one, as well as the API download. And with that, I would be happy to fake or bluff my way through any questions.
Appreciate the presentation, David. Thank you. That was absolutely phenomenal. And I went back and looked at some of the photos that I'd taken, or images, I should say, of the moon, and thought they were nice, but I guess in comparison, they pale. So appreciate that. I know Peggy asked her question. Bob Gillespie had asked 2 questions. So Bob, I don't know if you're still on there. You want to come off of mute now?
Yeah, fantastic presentation. I was wondering if there were any image data files and maybe some videos about processing to practice and learn with. And also I was wondering if maybe you could redisplay that frame that had the 4 pictures of the improvement in processing.
Oh, sure. Now let's go to the first one. As far as videos and whatnots, I keep threatening to carve the time in the schedule of showing what I do in FireCapture and doing what I do in AutoStakkert, and then hopefully that can help somebody. I'd have no problem helping you a little bit there, but there are things that you can find on both AutoStakkert on the net. Now, as far as going back to that one, it may be easier if I just do.
And Bob, are you asking for actual image files to practice with?
Yes.
So you're looking this one, yeah. Again, upper left is the single frame. The other one, the upper right is the stacked. Lower right, lower left, I'm sorry, is sharpened, and then the lower right is final processed.
Thank you.
And Bob, I know you'd asked about the link to David's video on how to clean your telescope. I did post that in the chat. If anyone wants to see that, it's there in the chat. If you don't have it in the chat, just do a search for the Johnson Space Center Astronomy Club on YouTube, and it's in one of the club videos. Correct, David?
Correct. I will slightly apologize for the vid. It's the first vid I ever recorded and then tried to voice dub. And then as Connie says, my soft tenor voice didn't do well in the dub. So my voice kind of fades in and out a little bit. But if you bear with it, I do cover cleaning and collimation.
Yep, and I've watched that, and I used some of the advice that you had there to help clean my 12-inch foot cast grid. So thank you very much for that. I hope others find it useful as well. Glenn Lugian said, collectspace.com says the distance between the Apollo 11 and 16 landing sites is 379 kilometers, about 236 kilometers. Okay, thanks for that. Debbie says, cleaning optics, good idea for a novice meeting. So you might get a ping from Debbie to come back.
Well, I don't know how I would do that other than to try to dissect that into slides. That was one of those things we discussed about doing, and I said, there's no way we could do this live. So it was our first attempt at doing a pre-recorded meeting.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I'm sure we could work something out.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, those were the questions that we had in chat. If anybody has any additional questions, please feel free to come off of mute and ask your question of David directly.
Hey, David, this is Salil. I had a quick question for you.
Okay.
As I was wondering, so once you take these images, when you go into just terrific amount of detail when you're explaining stuff as you see on the images, and how you can get lost. I was wondering, do you actually use a magnifying glass and things of that nature to kind of scour away little pieces?
No, because once I start getting up near 90% to full 100%, once I start pulling it past 100%, it starts to begin to pixelate on me. So I don't really pull out that much more other than what's in the picture itself. And I have to keep reminding myself, I'm using small pixels, 2.4 microns, but I'm shooting something that's 240,000 miles away. So I'm only going to get so much resolution.
Okay, thank you, David. Beautiful presentation.
Thanks for the questions, Salil. Any other questions? Going once? Oh, I think somebody.
Yay, my computer held together. The inside joke, folks, is this is my computer is probably almost 11 years old, and it's showing its age, and it cratered on me during the back end of a JSCAS meeting. So I was, I was a little nervous, saying this is my first major presentation to HAS. I don't want this computer to do a face plant.
It was a wonderful job, David. So we're thankful the computer held up and was able to keep up with you. So thank you. All right, last call for questions for David. All right, we're getting a lot of comments commending you for the presentation here, David. So great work. Thanks again for joining us tonight. It was a wonderful presentation. I think you're going to make me go out and start practicing with Photoshop again. As much as I don't want to get into astrophotography, I know you said there's a difference between lunar photography, astrophotography, and EAA. I don't particularly enjoy astrophotography just because the learning curve is so great, but I know so many of the other club members do. But I always enjoy taking a quick snapshot of the moon. So thanks for providing us some tips,
Sure.
and hopefully I can try this and get some better results.
My pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Let me know if you all can see it. March meeting.
Got it.
Okay, perfect.
Got it.
Our meetings next month are going to be on Thursday, March 3rd, online for our novice meeting, as Debbie had mentioned earlier. And our general meeting is the following day, Friday, March the 4th. We're still debating whether or not to go back in person. We're going to err on the side of caution as always, but at the same time, if it looks like Omicron tends to continue downwards in terms of the hospitalizations and cases and things like that, then I would like to have a hybrid meeting there at the Mendenhall Center and online with Zoom. So stay tuned for that. Like I'd mentioned earlier, hopefully our migration gets done in the next week or so. We'll let folks know when to renew. I know some of you have reached out to us and said, oh, I've accidentally forgotten about that and renewed anyway. That's okay. We're processing those. It's just a manual process. And to do that for several hundred memberships would take an awful long time. So we appreciate everybody's patience and holding off a little bit longer. If you're following us online, or if you do have online social media accounts and whatnot, you can track us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And as always, if you have questions, you can email us at info@astronomyhouston.org. So until then, everybody, stay safe, stay warm, and we'll see you next month. Take care, everyone.